Hey everybody, welcome to On the Clock with Caroline Clark. Today we have an esteemed and wonderful guest, New York-based psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, Dr. Henry McCurtis. He's a Stanford-trained physician who works now in the South Bronx, but is the former director of psychiatry at Harlem Hospital. So he's deeply connected to our community and its mental health. And he's very, very busy these days. So Dr. McCurtis, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Pleasure.
So Dr. McCurtis, we want to talk today about grief in particular, but also sort of the range of things that you've been seeing in your practice as we move through this pandemic. I know that you're an addiction specialist as well, and that is also bringing issues to bear as we move through this. So for starters, can you just tell us what you are seeing primarily? What are the patterns and the things that you're most concerned about that you're seeing folks dealing with now?
Well, on top of pre-existing conditions, depression, anxiety, other major severe and persistent mental illnesses, and just the basic stressors of life, in particular in the patient population that I work with in the South Bronx, as well as in my private practice, you have superimposed on this the uncertainty and the disorganizing experience of the pandemic. It produces panic, uncertainty, anxiety globally, and it permeates throughout every system in our society, in our world.
Yeah.
And it is impossible for none of us not to be affected by it.
I know that a lot of your patients were already dealing with anxiety and depression in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing this highly exacerbated? Are you seeing many more patients come in with those things? And how do those symptoms present? When should people, because we're all feeling so anxious, we're all feeling so overwhelmed, depending on the day, the minute, the weather, the hour. We're managing everything that we're feeling and all of this uncertainty. When should a person be concerned, whether you are living with someone or you're just monitoring yourself? When should you move from, okay, this is sort of par for the course for dealing with something this enormous, and this is something I really need to reach out and get help with?
Excellent question. As I said, this is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. But when does it reach the point of being overwhelming to one's ability to function? When one's sleep is impaired, when one is unable to focus and concentrate and manage the basic activities of daily living. When one is so afraid that you can't go out of the house to buy supplies. When you are overwhelmed with crying and you don't know why. When you can't eat. And these things may come gradually, or they may just come all of a sudden. What I see, for example, I talked to a woman this morning that I talked to a week ago who lost her, I told you, I think about this, her husband of 25 years. This morning, she told me that she went to her primary care physician because she felt severe pain on the left side of her body, in her chest. And her heart was beating so fast that she felt it was going to come out of her chest. Well, now, this was anxiety, but she didn't know. So she went to primary care. They took an EKG, and it showed a tachycardia. And they gave her a medication called a beta blocker, and they gave her another medication called Vistaril, which is a sedative. Well, now she already had medications that I was prescribing for her, but she went to primary care and she got something else. Well, she took all of that last night, Tuesday night, I think it was. And she found herself outside of her apartment, locked herself out, only could knock on the neighbor's door, no clothes, no shoes.
Hold on 1 second. Hello.
Now this is a person who's already dealing with anxiety, hit by grief. And now you have something like this. Well, this is the kind of problem. Now, we're in this state of telehealth. So I have to talk her through this on the phone. Have to go through all of her medicines, tell her the ones not to take anymore, what to take, etc.
And this is a woman, just to be clear, this is a woman whose husband died from COVID.
25 years. Suddenly he got up that morning and suddenly he couldn't breathe. She called EMS and he was dead within 48 hours, 25 years.
Yeah, and I know he was the breadwinner also, I think you said. And so she has all of the spiraling issues, the grief from his loss, the suddenness of it, and she was really entirely dependent upon him.
Right.
So what do you say, to someone like that? And beyond medication, and so many people are dealing with the loss of loved ones, are dealing with the loss of elders who they're not even able to see perhaps before they die. I have a friend whose family gathered recently to say goodbye to their elderly mother on a Zoom call because they were told she was at the end and they weren't able to travel to be with her. These sorts of things that just a few months ago were unthinkable, unimaginable, are happening every single second. And so grief, I would imagine, is being compounded by the way things are happening, whether it's super sudden, whether you can't say goodbye, whether you can't be with your person and you worry about them dying alone, whether you can't have a funeral, you can't figure out how to even get the person's remains moved to the proper place to wait for a funeral. I mean, there are all these sort of layers of things around grief right now. So how are you counseling people in how to navigate through, these things that we had no preparation for?
We have to apply basic cognitive behavioral strategies. And I rely heavily on something that is universal, and that's the serenity principle. I try to help my patients to identify what they can control. Separate that from what they can't. And then Find these islands of agency, places that you have some degree of capacity, and anchor yourself with that. Starting with the very basic functions like sleep. I want to help this woman to get a good night's sleep. I want to make sure she is eating, that she had lost a lot of weight. I want to make sure that she is eating. Nothing more than just drinking Suscacal or Ensure 3 times a day, along with a diet that is free of anti-inflammatories as best as possible. I want to make sure that she gets up and she walks, gets around. Now, what she's doing right now, today, she's redoing her floor. She's she has her aunt over helping her. And so she's engaged in things. She's strong. She has resilience. So I want to help people to identify their pre-existing strengths. We all have a wardrobe, if you will, of character strengths. And some of them, like any wardrobe, we have things that we haven't worn in a long time. And very often there are things that we can take out of that wardrobe, dust it off, and begin to use it in times of difficulty. We can learn to use our strengths to solve our problems. That's the opportunity when we're faced with a crisis like this that overwhelms us. It maximizes motivation. Consequently, with maximized motivation, people are more receptive to change. So there is paradoxically an opportunity here for people like the patient that I described, most of us, because it's an opportunity when all of our previous coping strategies are now thrown on their heads. We can't do anything that we used to do. Our regular routine that we had it all together is now crashed. We can't even go out of the house. Of course, we're opening up now, but still it's uncertain. Jobs lost, health in some cases lost. As we said, lives, loved ones lost. We are in a state of total disarray, but this is an opportunity to look within and identify the resources that we have ignored. Hope, a strength that we have, it's part of our culture. It's one of the things that sustained us, hope, our spirituality. These are things that we can begin to grapple with. I was walking this morning, yesterday, around the reservoir, and the song came to me. Woke up this morning, the Lord is blessing me right now. Well, now, gratitude, that's another strength that we have. This woman has money. She has an apartment, which I had to keep her from just leaving in the state of grief and going to Memphis and leaving it, but she has an apartment, gratitude. She has a roof over her head. She has money. She has some money.
Yeah.
She has provisions. And so we have to be able to grab hold to the things that we have. God grant me the courage to change the things I can. The serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. During these states, our emotional mind swamps our wise and reasonable mind. So consequently, we often aren't able to make that discernment between the things we can't and the things we can. That's where it's helpful to be able to sit with someone and explore, identify what you can do and what you can't. So medications are helpful, but that kind of exploration and consequential thinking and decision making is critical, while being aware of what you have inside you. See, that's
How do you cultivate that awareness? Because, you know, I think there are people who will say, you mentioned pre-existing strengths.
yes.
But what about the person who says, I don't even know what those are? I don't even know how to begin. Or, you know, you talk about serenity and the serenity prayer, which is such a pillar in, you know, 12-step programs and addiction, again, in which you specialize. But sometimes people are like, you know, I just can't control anything, especially in all of this uncertainty.
Mhm.
How do you help people drill down on what the strengths are that they can call upon, and how to understand what you can control?
Well, usually in states of profound depression, and which often anxiety will also produce, you feel hopeless and helpless, and you can't do anything. There was I think it was Elijah in the Bible, that Jezebel threatened him, and it scared him so much he became overwhelmed with despondency and fled to the countryside, laid down under a tree and begged God to kill him. He was so depressed. I guess you'd say suicidal. Well, how did he get out of it? Through his faith, through the guidance of God. He first laid down and he slept. He slept. He rested.
Sleep is critically important. You can't overestimate the importance of sleep, right?
Slept. And then he ate. We have to do those basic things first. That's what I meant. I want this woman to sleep, get a good night's sleep. Every patient with anxiety, when they come to me, if they're in a state of manic state, if they're psychotic, if they're anxious, if they're depressed, the first thing I want to be able to do is to help them to sleep.
What are some tools for that beyond medication? What are the things that, you know, those, because a lot of people are struggling with sleep, and in some cases just their rhythms are off. They're sleeping during the day, they're up all night, they just can't really get it together. How do you help people? You know, what tools can we all call upon to sort of get that piece together?
You said it beautifully. It's the rhythm. It's our sleep hygiene. The first thing that I tell people is set a bedtime. set a bedtime. 30 minutes before that bedtime, wind down.
What does that look like?
Sitting down, no TV, no cell phone, maybe the Bible, some soft music, some meditative reflection. I will use at times in this time of apps, an app called Calm. And Calm has a series called 7 Days of Sleep. Wonderful series that carries you through, it educates you about sleep hygiene. It educates you about the need, the critical need for sleep, what sleep does. And then it carries you through a series of meditative, relaxing exercises. And each night you're able to go through this. And if you do that 30 minutes, take that 30 minutes and maybe use that app. I also will use melatonin, which is something the brain produces at night. The pineal gland produces a chemical called melatonin, and it is linked to our circadian rhythm. When night comes, the pineal produces melatonin in order that we begin to get ready for sleep.
And you can get that anywhere. You can get that in a health food store, in a drug store, sometimes even the grocery store. So it's very easy to find.
Very easy to find. And I tell people though, because you can get it anywhere, get one brand. I like the Nature's Best, and you get a 3 milligram tablet. You start with the 3 milligram tablet first. You can go to 6 if that doesn't do it. You can go to 9. You can go to 12. I have some people on 12. But
Is
that
the maximum? Is there a maximum?
no max, but that's just my what
Okay.
I find to be effective. And you no side effects from it, because as I say, it's a natural substance that the brain produces, but because we trick our circadian rhythms sometimes, our pineal isn't putting it out when it should, and we just sort of, it helps us to restore our sleep hygiene and our basic sleep rhythm. Well, that 30-minute period those are some of the tools that can be used there to get us to sleep. See, sleep onset. Now, if we have broken sleep, which a lot of people do, I tell people not to just lie in bed tossing and turning. For God's sakes, don't turn the TV on. Don't get your iPad and start reading. Get up, leave the bedroom, or go sit in a chair, take a book, a Bible, something, and read, and sleep will come again.
Why not read in bed? So
No.
that you're already there.
No. Don't read in bed. The bed is for sleeping and adult pleasures, not for any. Those are the two things. Get up out of the bed. Don't. I see people who make the bed their office, their this, that.
Right. Well, especially now, because people are working from home. So, yeah, that happens a lot.
Set up for poor sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
Those are some things. And then set up time to get up. Time to get up. And get up. Now, it's very important, if you can, and this happens a lot, if you can get up and put your gear by your bed and get up and get out. Go for a walk, go for a jog, go for something. Wake yourself up. And then you're in a rhythm. You're set, because very often, as you're doing this early morning, you can begin to plan your day, your agency, your organization of what you're going to do next. How are you going to do it? You begin to think, because your emotional mind has shut down, and your wise and reasonable mind, or your executive functions, has come back online, because you rested, exercised. And if the emotional mind begins to slip in again, for example, while you're exercising, just speed it up, because the oxygen debt shuts it down. So these are some basic things that we can do to regain a certain sense of agency over our bodies.
Control, right? And setting yourself up for having a good day. But let me ask you, so I have two questions. One is there something about that 3 o'clock to 3:30 hour, just emotionally, where sleep gets interrupted? You know, you often hear the question, what's keeping you up at 3 a.m.? What's waking you up at 3 a.m.? Is there something particular about that time? And is there an ideal bedtime?
Well, I think that, you know, we all vary.
Everybody's clock is different, right?
And I, I, funny, I see people sometimes say, well, what time do you take your evening? What time do you get into bed? Well, I get into bed at 8 o'clock. People come in and say, oh, I'm not sleeping. I say, well, what time do you go to bed? I get into bed at 8 o'clock. I take my medicine and I get into bed at 8 o'clock. And I'm up all night, 3 o'clock. I said, well, you go to bed too early. You go to bed too early. I think, you know, 11 o'clock, 11:30, and you get up 6, you know, you can get yourself, I'm just throwing that number out because it
It's
sort
a
of,
general, right. A
but
general reasonable.
yeah, and you do the things that I was saying. You wind down, you go to bed, you get up, you crank up your endorphins, and you clear your head and you plan your day. And that's,
Now, question, what if part of my wind down is, you know, drinking up? What if part of my wind down is a wine down?
that's what a lot of people do. And I tell you, that's a setup for 3 o'clock in the morning wake up. Why? Because the blood alcohol level drops about that time. And when it drops, it sends out a noradrenergic, your reticular activating system starts to pump and you're awake. It's a setup. You drink at night. When the blood level goes down, your noradrenergic system kicks in and it arouses you. But I know people do it. I'm not, you know, I'm not a.
How concerned are you, and are you seeing, you know, addictions becoming intensified, new addictions arising, particularly in our community now? How concerned are you about that being one of the offshoots of all of this?
Well, I I don't have any hard and fast data. I know people are drinking more. And it's going to affect us because look, when you have pain, you want to escape. Pain being anything from anxiety or just feeling frustrated, you want to escape. And the best escape usually is something that you have control over. You have control over it until you don't. So, and that progression is something that's variable. And so a situation like this, where we are massively out of control, the things that we have control over, we're going to do. The things that soothe us, we're going to use more of it. I suspect more babies are going to be born as a result of this. And I suspect more people are going to drink, are going to use other substances. So we will see the manifestations of this as we look at the outcome as time passes and we're able to get that data. Right now, we're right in the middle of it. And so you can't really, all you know is that people are drinking more. You know?
Yeah. When you think about this time, you mentioned earlier the paradox of crisis often, that truly, we say it all the time, it sounds cliche, but baked into every crisis, there is the seed of opportunity. And you do hear, you know, we're having this conversation, we probably wouldn't have had it under normal circumstances. So there is a lot more information being shared about self-care, mental health awareness, emotional well-being. As someone who has a long history of experience in the mental health arena and has gone through other crises. You know, you are based in New York, you've been through 9/11, many of the storms that have come our way that have displaced people and caused trauma. Are there lessons that you've taken from prior incidents that are relevant here? Or is there something just completely new about all this that you want people to really be mindful of and to keep in mind as they move through the days ahead?
Well, as I reflect on it, I think that there's this idea of opportunity is something that I think we don't pay enough attention to. We hear it, it's cliche, but we don't know how to really operationalize it. And I mean, when I say we, I mean mental health practitioners. And I believe that the school of positive psychology that focuses on looking not at symptoms, anxiety, depression, etc., substance use, but looking at strengths is going to be extremely important during these periods. Why do I say that? We know naturally that people are resilient. There have been longitudinal studies done on populations that traditionally are challenged socioeconomically, for example. It's a group called the Children of Paradise in Hawaii, one of the islands, name skips me. But they started following them in the early 50s, and this cohort is still being followed. The idea was to find out what makes people resilient? What is resilience? And how do people, when
A resume or resume
they're,
is a document used and created by
Siri's telling me what resilience is. But the idea was, if you take this cohort, you find that they found that a third of the people develop mature defenses, adaptive defenses, and do well despite the socioeconomic disadvantages that confronted them in the first decades of their lives. Another group, maybe not so much. Another group, maybe they don't do so well. If you look at that group that prospered despite the adversity, what did they have? And they found some very basic things, like likability. Well, now if you deconstruct likability, what does that mean? It means that people are kind, that people are curious, that people love to learn, that people have hope. These are strengths. That these are individuals who have been able to garner those things into a package that was there when they were small. And then in the social environment, because if you have these things, your social environment positively is more likely to positively reinforce it than not. So kindness, curiosity, love of learning. If we can begin to cultivate these things, and with people in crises, if just to begin to prepare, if we know that these are things that conveys resilience, and when life is always going to present us with difficulty, challenges, if we can begin to nurture people in the first 10 years of their lives in ways that cultivates and makes them aware of their strengths that convey resilience. You see, that's where I look at these situations. It's sort of like knowing, you know, we when we do a retrospective about the supply lines, that we see now systemically where the problems were and what do we do to prevent that. So the crisis has given us an opportunity to figure that out and to sort that out. Same thing is applicable. What do we do to make our people more resilient? Can we operationalize resilience? We're going to always have challenges. How can we best suit ourselves up and our character to meet them?
I feel like resiliency, though, is also inextricably tied to optimism and hope. You mentioned hope early in the conversation. And, you know, I think one of the greatest plagues, particularly in Black and Brown communities in our society, is that piece, right? It's like our hope, which is a fundamental birthright, right? We've inherited it. Our ancestors would never have prevailed this far without it, in spite of all the obstacles, arguably many of which, you know, were at least as great as what we're facing now, depending on the moment in history. But we are being hit from all sides in this, right? Economically, we're being pummeled. Jobs are being lost. Finances are being toppled. Health is being toppled. All in these ways that are, you know, hitting us harder than others. And so we get hit with that information that, oh, you all are suffering more than everybody else. So there's that bit of news. And then we have all the additional traumas that aren't even related to the pandemic, but that are just fundamental to our existence in this society. We have, the killing of Ahmaud Arbery a couple of weeks ago, and now the search for that piece of justice. And so you have these traumas layered on top of all of the other pre-existing things. And so that need and desire for hope and optimism, when we're worried about what's happening behind some of the closed doors in our communities, people who can't eat, children who aren't getting the education that they're going to need to thrive coming out of this, elders who may be alone and not have anyone to care for them, relationships that are in turmoil without the support. It is so overwhelming at times that, that intellectual sense that, oh, we got to hang on to optimism and hope is there. But, the real, oh my gosh, it's another day in the midst of all this. And where is the hope coming from? And where's this going to end? They're oppositional. So how do you tell people to manage that so that they can manifest the best pieces, the things that are really going to help them do well coming out? And are there age groups? You mentioned the importance of sort of cultivating resiliency in children, but are there age groups within this that you are most concerned about in terms of their vulnerability and maybe lack of preparedness to find that hope and optimism, to have the tools to do that?
Well, let's unpack that. You've asked me a lot, and what came through my mind as you were talking, you see, you laid out the challenges, you laid out the layers of adversity that we are encountering. You talked about the structural challenges of racism, the historical challenges. And it is true that if I cognitively wrapped my head around that group of things, I could easily become overwhelmed. And that's what a lot of people do. You either become overwhelmed and you passively escape through substances. You become enraged and you become self-destructive towards self or other. These are possible things. The threat it can result in it. And we see these things. We see the manifestations. You treat a person like they're half a person, it's no wonder what the other half will become. And that is what you're describing. Now, what I try to do, and I think what we all have to appreciate, is that as human beings, we are inclined to think in black or white, all or nothing. And we eliminate the shades of gray. Opportunity lies somewhere in between those two polar opposites. Things are neither going to be perfect, nor are they going to be absolutely dismal. We have to be able to find our way through the shades of gray. So the first thing that happens with us is, as human beings, we're inclined to move through that dialectic of black or white. And we have to have some degree of consciousness to realize that, and when stress occurs, challenges occur, it's very easy to flip to that pessimistic side. Not talking about being Pollyannish and unrealistic, but really being able to see where my possibilities are, where my opportunities are. What, here again, applying the serenity principle and finding our way through. Historical consciousness should inform us and encourage us that a way can be made out of no way. You pointed out that there have been other very challenging experiences that we've encountered. And as you were talking about the unemployment, it went through my mind. I wondered, what did people do during the Depression when there were no jobs and when we were confronted by we had just come out of the most vituperous and deadly periods characterized by Tulsa in the 20s, early 20s, and then the Depression hits. I mean, within that decade, the top of that decade and then into the next decade, we were living in a period where whole Black agency was wiped out in Tulsa. And then the Depression hit and just boom. Well, we came through that. We came through that. And we'll get through this. I can tell you something else, though. Predictably, every time we move through these cyclical periods of severe oppression and then the emergence of agency, there is a body within the social psychology of America that becomes overwhelmed by fear, threat. If you look at our history, that same group, and it's made up by and large of property, wealthy whites and ignorant, partially literate whites who come together in an alliance. And right after Emancipation Proclamation, they came at us with a vengeance. You look at the Colfax Rebellion, that's an example of it. And they tried to obliterate the gains of Reconstruction. You jump to Tulsa. We'd come that Black Wall Street. That says it right there in terms of the agency. They bombed it from above. Literally. Alvin Ailey just did a nice piece on that not too long ago. You look at Emmett Till. That's our Trayvon, my generation's Trayvon Martin. Same thing. Agency, we had come through the war, we were pushing for civil rights, the movement was coming, being born, and this little boy went down there and he didn't know his place. According to them, they killed him. Brutally, lynched him. But they stopped doing that. George Wallace taught them how not to be so brazen in the 60s. And he began to provide the political strategies that resulted in the various dog whistles that Nixon and Reagan perfected. War on poverty, law and order, these dog whistles, every time you, not war on drugs and law and order, every time you say it, you know who they're talking about. And over the next decade, you saw the prison industrial complex
Explode. Yeah.
So no longer was it lynchings, brazen things like that. It was just a systematic removal after the gains of the civil rights movement, after Malcolm and Martin propelled us into I'm Black and I'm proud attitudes. They systematically began this process. And then Obama, it drove them crazy. And so it gave us Trump, who's simply a symbol of that body politic, of that coalition that has existed since Emancipation Proclamation. They're there. They're the 30% of 30 to 40% that always stay. We see them. They're in the open now. So we have to do what Stacey Abrams is doing. That's where we find hope. Politically, that's what we do. Politically, personally, we have to begin to do the things that I was saying. And from a cognitive perspective, we have to not protect ourselves from becoming overwhelmed by Black or white thinking, all or nothing thinking, and realize that there are opportunities in the shades of gray. Because if you fall victim to Black or white thinking, you will jump to conclusions and prematurely make decisions. You will either think catastrophically, or you'll be so overwhelmed by your anger that you can't think clearly. You'll be in a state of blame and you will be blaming yourself, or you'll be blaming others. Or you'll personalize and think that I'm the cause of it. It's me, I'm inadequate. That kind of thinking, and this is where I try to work with my patients to not to fall victim to cognitive distortions. That's what Black or white thinking does. That's what missing the opportunities that are in the shades of gray.
So let me ask you this before we close, because we've wound this conversation, much to my surprise, through history, through into politics, through sleep and all of these things. But you know, one of the things that is weighing on people is the upcoming election. And you know, our leaders are sort of fanning the flames of uncertainty and Black and white thinking and catastrophic thinking. So not a lot of help there in terms of, you know, emotional well-being, right? Mm-hmm. How do we navigate over the next several months engaging so that we can hope to have some sense of control over what is happening politically and make our voices heard, and at the same time, you know, protecting ourselves from what feels like chaos and what feels like, to some, a foregone conclusion where they feel powerless. You know, how do we approach the next several months in our country in grappling with our political reality on top of everything else, as Black people in particular?
Well, what comes to my mind is, where is the agency? The agency is in the vote. The mechanisms and the initiatives are the ones symbolized and actualized, operationalized by Stacey Abrams. to protect the vote and to make sure we vote. It's as simple as that. Go pull that lever. Whatever that, go do it. That we can do. That's where agency is. All that other stuff, I can't do anything about. That 30% that's crazy, I have to leave them alone. Stay away from them, because they'll kill you if they catch you running through. Stay away from them. But I can't change their minds. But I can vote. I can encourage other people to vote. We can turn them out. We can push them back under. We can make them go back underground. We can do that. And we have the weapon to do it, the vote. We died for that vote.
We did, and we have to make sure that the folks who are dying now are not dying in vain, and that's one way to do it. So thank you so much, Dr. McCurtis. You're on the front lines every day. Stay safe and stay well. We got you. We need to make sure for our own mental health, we do everything we can to control what we control. That means getting sleep, eating well, and making sure we vote.